This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with international rugby sevens coach Warren Abrahams. He discusses his upbringing in South Africa, his transition to England, and what he noticed from a cultural perspective, along with his inventive game model. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So Warren, listen, really appreciate you jumping on and spending a bit of your time with me. How are things at your end?
Now, firstly, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to share and learn. Obviously, it's like it's a beautiful day, like being back home where I'm from. And obviously, the country has come to a dead standstill. But look, I'm enjoying this weather. Everything's good. Trying to create new things on a daily basis. So, and obviously, the weather definitely helps me because it opens up some of those routes from back home.
No, that makes complete sense to me. One of my good friends and someone I grew up with is South African, and he thrives in this weather where the rest of us are all melting. He's there, he's got his braai out, he's having a beer, and he's just imagining he's back in Durban, etc. So I can imagine it's similar for you in terms of thriving in this type of weather. So obviously for people that don't know you, haven't come across your work, etc., do you just want to give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of, I guess, where you grew up? You alluded to a little bit there, and then kind of a whistle-stop tour of some stops and where you are at the moment.
Obviously, like you said, born and raised in Cape Town. Left Cape Town at about 23. Very naive and young with no plan in my back pocket. Had a little bit of savings. Convinced mum and dad that everything's sorted, but actually nothing was sorted. I remember sitting on a plane and going, what the hell am I doing? But I've been here now for most of my adult life, been over in England, probably about what now, 16 years, nearly 17 years, been over here. Obviously when I rocked up here, no one knew really of me or know who I was, so I had to pave my own little way to where I am now. And then so most got a beautiful young family now, 2 kids. One will be 5 in September, one will be 2 in December. Mrs. who always keeps me grounded, feet on the ground when the head gets too big, but so, and then the coaching journey has taken me to some amazing places so far. My journey started as a community coach. Was one of my first few jobs with London Irish and Harlequins, and luckily enough, they must have liked what I done at Harlequins. They created a sort of an elite pathway academy role for me at Harlequins at the time. Spent 8 years at Harlequins rugby club. I had really interesting years down there, and while I was doing that, found myself at Lithuania, coaching the Lithuanian national sevens team for 2 years on the European circuit. That transformed into getting a role with England Sevens under Simon Amor, where and Tony Rogue is the current head coach, where I spent 5 years learning the craft under 2 really good coaches there. And then found myself coaching the USA national women's team in prep for the 2020 Olympics. Did some probably one of my favorite jobs so far. And then had some various consultancy roles along the way. Consulted with Germany. After USA, took on the Welsh women's 15s and 7s role for 12 months. and now currently I'm sort of doing a performance consultant role with the Brazil national sevens team. So a very, very diverse coaching background, but learning some beautiful lessons alongside that. And then just in process of building my own sort of online rugby business at the moment, from coach development to a rugby skills academy, which is slowly growing. And yeah, that's where I'm investing most of my time at the moment. Yeah, that's a snapshot of the coaching journey.
No, perfect. And I think what it does highlight, as you said, the wide-ranging experiences that you've had in a variety of areas, and it'd be really good to dig into those. And as I said to you off air, I played rugby for the first time this weekend in 15 years and chose sevens, which is brutal for anyone who hasn't played it. So enjoyable, but yeah, very, very brutal. I think, I guess, starting point for me is why rugby? Obviously in South Africa growing up, what drew you to rugby? Why did you initially decide that that was going to be your path? And yeah, what drew you to the game?
Yeah, it's probably not so much what drew me to the game. Being from South Africa, I think you come out with a rugby ball in your lap over there. So I'm probably born into the game. That's probably the easiest answer. No, look, when you're from there, and the era we went through at the time when I grew up watching the Springboks, I was born in a very, very interesting space during that apartheid space. Where I grew up, not got a big concept and understanding about it as you evolve as a young person. It's only now when I go, wow, I can't believe I've been in those situations when I'm looking from the outside in. But at the time, I mean, in 1995 Rugby World Cup probably changed my life forever. I mean, that moment Nelson Mandela gave that trophy to Francois Pienaar, geez, that just inspired me. I wanted to play for the Springboks so badly. I wanted to be involved in coaching. I didn't even know what coaching was, but it just felt like it was the right thing. So the dream probably just started there for me. And from then on, geez, I Chester Williams playing in that team. He was my hero. Sadly, not with us anymore, but I wanted to be this guy so badly. So yeah, I was just inspired. And then Brayton Paulser comes along, another person who looked exactly like me. And probably that's the stuff that drew me to the game, and really that the true values of the game, and see how the nation got united around just one symbol, and it was the Springbok. But the Springbok meant so much to everyone, and everyone had an opinion about the Springbok, and I wanted to be part of that. So that's probably the stuff that drew me, and that I think that moment where I sort of visualized and go as a young 11, 12-year-old, go, is I want to experience this one day. And that dream, it still sits there very much every day. And yeah, that's probably the best answer I can give you.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I think it's probably quite a nice piece to talk about, because you don't go into it too often. So obviously, as you said, you grew up in that era where there was apartheid and stuff. And can you describe for you what that moment, in terms of having Nelson Mandela there and Chester Williams and people like that, meant for you in your community, and I guess what boost that gave you to believe that that dream was actually possible? Because I think at times we can understate, we talk about players being role models and the importance of role models being on TV. We talk about women's football at the moment in England, and that being on BBC, and how good that is for girls.
Yeah.
Yeah, to see that. Can you just describe what that meant for you and your friends and your families, having that kind of on your TVs in the communities that you're in?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's I remember it like it was yesterday. That finals alone in our community where we were. Now you got to remember, not everyone had access to stream the game or have the ability to watch the game live on TV. So we were all crowded around. I remember we were around my friend's house, and I'm talking about pretty much all of us in this space trying to watch the Springboks in that final against New Zealand. Now the interesting thing there was probably 90% of that community supported the All Blacks based on where we come from, because they couldn't connect with the Springbok because of what the Springbok stood or what the Springbok stood for in this era that we grew up in apartheid, because it was seen as a white man's sport and it's an Afrikaner sport. They owned the Springboks. Only when Nelson Mandela came into lead the country where it became this rainbow thing, and the Springbok became a true part of who we all are. So the aftermath of that game was unbelievable. How we all probably the first time I had physical contact with a white person in terms of shaking their hands or hugging, because we all were one because we won this real massive Rugby World Cup, and all of a sudden we all are sharing the same thing. So it was a pretty special moment, how we all ran through the streets of our local community. And when I say all, normally it was us, the people of color, who were marching against something because of our situation. All of a sudden, we had this shared common goal that we all felt we achieved, and we were running for the same purpose, and that purpose was joy in that moment of time. So yeah, I can still see the whole picture unfold in front of me, but also how some of my best friends, and still have some of my best friends today, who's literally in tears because New Zealand lost, because they had such a deep connection to the All Blacks, which was bizarre for me at the time. But when you go into the depths and history and you understand things now, you go, okay, that makes sense. So no, it was an amazing experience, and it's definitely probably a moment that shaped me and still shaping me today.
And how proud does it make you now in terms of you see the diversity in that Springbok squad? Captain as obviously a man from that community, etc. So how proud does that make you to see how far they've come, etc.?
Yeah, look, it's massive, and it's an ongoing conversation. It's an ongoing conversation in South Africa, and the progress we've made, like being one of the few countries who's won it now 3 times. So, but the evolution of the Springbok and what it stands for, and now we've got the Protea and the Springbok on our chest, and it's and you see how the country grow and changes. Obviously, it's got its difficulties on a daily basis, like we all do over here as well. But now the evolution is amazing, and the most important thing is, and I always say, look, if you can see it, you can dream it. And if you can dream it, you can be it. And now, obviously, you see it with the current England team. You see it with the Springboks team. There's people that looks like you. So when there's someone that looks like you, you can dream about these things, because it's happening. It's the same as what I had when I was a young fella.
Perfect. So moving on, what drew you into the coaching side of the game as you got a little bit older? What drew you towards that?
Yeah, I was lucky with not lucky with the coaching side. I always knew I wanted to help people. I just never knew how I was going to help people through rugby, for instance. And one of my we finished school, our last day in school, and my friend was coaching the school's under 14s team. And he invited me to come along because we used to play together. It's like, oh, why don't you come along and help me coach these guys? So I I went in for a little session, played around with the players with a few things, and then I got another invite. But what happened was he never come back. He never came back to train. So I kept turning out, and then I ended up coaching this team. And from then on, it was I never looked back, and I was about 19 years old at the time. So I tried to play and balance the two together. And it was the fact that that I can support people. I see the growth. I get excited when I can take someone from A to B, and those stuff. And I just got hungrier and hungrier every time I see someone progressing and reaching new levels. That stuff really made me excited. And obviously, then the team is getting better.
Yeah. So obviously, you mentioned around kind of having that initial contact. It sounds like it's a very person-centered point of view, and like you like seeing their development and the way that they improve, etc. Why do you think that particularly appealed to you, and do you see that as something that has progressed throughout your career that you have particular interest in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I always come back to this one thing. I went through my rugby career, and I did all right. I got some significant injuries at the wrong times. Always when there's something really special about to happen, some freak accident would happen to me. But my mom always used to say, maybe you're just meant to help people. And I used to get so angry and annoyed. I was like, why is he choosing this particular moment where I'm meant to go into this provincial game or international competition and saying, maybe you're just meant to help people and not meant to go and play. So that really frustrated me until obviously as you grow up and mature a little bit, you go, oh, okay, now it makes sense. So because my passion is that's what ultimately why I coach, is to inspire and develop people. And if I can do it through in my coaching process, through the way I deliver, through the way I find the level of connection with the individual, and I can see that progress, that person could potentially reach something that I could never have reached, but I can play a significant part in how that individual could get there, whether it's on a rugby field or whether it's off the field. If I can have some sort of influence to help that person, player, whether male or female, then I've played a little part in that, and a small little part in someone's journey, and that's where I got excited from, and that's where the creativity comes in, and where I try and look at ways, how can I find a different way to help that particular individual based on their needs. Yes, hopefully that answers your question there.
Yeah, no, 100%. I guess obviously you mentioned around some of it being tied into injury. Was any of it tied into coach interactions that you'd had as well? Was there any particular coaches that stood out that maybe didn't affect you in a positive way, or those that maybe had a real positive impact in the way that you thought about rugby and the way the game should be played?
Yeah, that's a pretty cool question. Now, I probably won't say a big negative impact on my playing career, really growing up in South Africa, because you only know what you know, and the way we were coached in South Africa was in a very rigid, structured manner. You do this and you do it well, or you out type of thing, and you do it till you bleed. That was most of our contact sessions with, right? No one leaves the field until someone bleeds. That was the norm back back then, but there was success linked to that, and that's obviously another conversation for another day. But there's success always linked to that, so not really negatively influenced where you go, this guy or girl is really not working for me. But I suppose I had a coach that had a massive influence on me. Very, he was fresh out of playing in Super Rugby for the Bulls. His name is Pierre Rivers. He was tag prop, really, really good rugby player. He come in and he helped us. So he was in, and I think probably what made him good was he knew his job as a player. He was probably not equipped to be a very successful rugby coach because he didn't have that sort of background. But what made him good is how he made you feel. So he had this real specific way of how he's going to do things, how we play, etc. But he used to always say to me, it was a good read because he could see it doesn't quite fit into the puzzle the way I want him to fit in, because it just does his own thing here. But he used to just say to me individually, he'd go, right, you just bring the magic. And I used to go, oh, I wonder why this guy's saying this to me as a horse player. It's just, you just bring the magic. All you do is just bring the magic. You just bring the magic. You have training sessions, games before the game, whatever it might be, just bring the magic. And obviously my confidence went through the roof. And then he used to go, he'd give his game plan, and then he'd go, oh, Warren, you've got carte blanche to do whatever you need to do. And everyone was obviously looking at me going, really? So that just meant, I was playing fullback at the time. When the ball gets kicked to me, most of the time in South Africa, you kick the ball back, and I just ran it back. I just did what I felt is the right thing to do at that moment in time. And obviously, so he now, when I always talk about how he made me feel at the time, was it just made me feel ridiculously good about myself and boosted my confidence. But also what he did one day was he dropped me from the starting team, and he wouldn't speak to me until I worked out. I can't remember what I did wrong. I think I turned up late for a meeting or whatever it might be, and it just bam, gone. And then it made me play in the team below to earn my stripes back, to go back in it. So he gave me some valuable life lessons there through the experience. But probably the big thing is how he made me feel, and that's a big part of sort of my coaching process. Or ultimately why I coach is if I can get that part right. But like we both know, in a coaching space, you're not going to please everyone. You're not always gonna get that right. But if the odds is in my favor 99% of the time, it's a pretty good starting point.
And is there any particular players that you've worked with that you've had that type of relationship, or one where you've really understood what they need as a player to help them produce where maybe they hadn't done previously, or that they've had some troubles? Because it sounds like there that he understood you as a player, which is I need to keep him disciplined with around the edges about not turning late and stuff.
Yeah,
but actually on the pitch, he needs that freedom. That's how he produces his best rugby. So is there any examples of you as a coach who's kind of worked that out with a player and you've seen them really flourish in that environment?
Yeah, I like it. It's one of the things I really sort of pride myself on it. And I had a high number of those particular moments. I remember a young player out in with England Sevens, unbelievable, gifted, talented athlete that world was his oyster bite, just like you referenced earlier. It's a pretty tough game. He just couldn't get that that switch across, and really struggled mentally, but not struggled in a way where he doesn't want to do the work. I think when it starts to become hard and difficult on a daily basis, and the pressures come in, all the external behaviors kicks in, the defense modes and all those stuff kicks in. That's putting blockers which can't get him across to deliver what he needs to deliver on the grass, for instance. And it's a high number of conversations around not what's happening on the grass, how do we deal with the stuff that's happening at home with the family, but all these type of stuff. And luckily the connection was really deep for us to work this type of stuff out, to be able to just get through that little barrier that he was facing. And pretty successful player at the moment by working through that. But it took a lot of work for me to understand those blockers, because sometimes as coaches we see the outcome on the grass. A really interesting tweet the other day from Ali Price, who plays for Scotland, after Scotland lost at the weekend. And in his tweet he says, if I can analyze someone's work for 80 minutes based on what they did that whole week, and then basically at the end of it go, you're pretty sure that's your job. Because that's what we do, isn't it? Scotland lost, and all of a sudden they all dreadful rugby players based on the tweet. So it's really understanding how they get onto the grass. So you have to spend and invest a lot of time in that side by being intentional with your interactions, etc. And I see this a lot in the academy space when I work with academy players. Like one of our probably most gifted players in this country at the moment, in England, nearly gave up the game because he just didn't like it anymore, because of the pressure, because what everyone puts on him. His home life, single parent, African descent. So all these things were traditionally different. So if we say this particular individual is not committed to be a professional rugby player, but he has to take a bus and a train and a bus and a taxi to get to a training venue, it's pretty committed for me. But his commitment just doesn't fit into the norm or the perception of how committed you should be as a rugby player.
And the coaches
focus I'm ranting there, but
no, I know what you mean, because then the coaches focus on him being 5 minutes late for training, and he's like, well, yeah, he's 5 minutes late for training, but actually got himself across London via, as you said, 2 buses, a taxi, and a train, compared to the individual who's half an hour early, but actually it's just been picked up and dropped off. Which one is actually more self-motivated for their commitment and development within that setup?
100%, and it's really how do we build a real understanding about the sort of well-being space, that both for coaches and players, that we can help them better. I think probably the advantage I maybe have versus some other coaches is my background. So I have to be really resilient to get to where I am today, and navigate some, or probably best way is to find solutions to the problems that was put into place. So I've got a little bit of experience there that I can, obviously when I see it, I can help, and I can get over those barriers that some of these young players are facing today.
So when you decided to make the jump across from South Africa to England, what was the driver behind that decision? And did you see any, I guess, particularly in rugby, any cultural differences that really flagged up to the way that you experienced and played and thought about rugby in South Africa in comparison to the way that you played and thought and experienced rugby in England?
Yeah, Um, Drivers, what was it's I always want, I'm always the um I was just curious. I was curious. I wanted to at the time no one in my family has even flown, let alone left the country. But I was curious about the possibilities um, that could be out there. Obviously, like I said, I was pretty naive and naive with the whole decision. I was involved with the provincial team. I didn't get a contract, and I said I'm going to England. Now I had a little bit of savings. I was playing at the time. I was running in an academy in South Africa as well, and yeah, I think the curiosity drove me over here, and it was just one of those things. You got to dip in, like I alluded to earlier with my coaching background at the moment. It's you never know. I can say, that country approached me, but no, I'm not going to go over there because I don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes you just gotta dip your toe in the water, or not even dip your toe. That's a little bit boring. Just jump in and see what happens. And that's what I did. I took a massive risk, and I was hoping for the best. Literally, I've been hoping for the best. So it wasn't the fact that I had this amazing plan sorted. When I get over, this is going to happen, I'm going to go there, and this club is going to come get me, and I'm going to do. No, it's literally, as I'm on the plane, I'm working out strategies of how I'm going to get from A to B when I get on the other side. But I revel in that level of uncertainty. So but I was drawn to the northern hemisphere. Obviously, when you go back home, you at the time Wasp was pretty good. Saracens was a good team. Leicester was a good team. So you probably a strong relationship to London Wasp because they were winning everything at the time. So you go, right, how can I end up playing for them? And plus, I turned up on the wrong visa that didn't allow me to play professional rugby over here. But the rugby community is it's a brilliant community. Put yourself out there, and people start talking, and things open up, and before I know it, I got picked up. I got housing, and I just let the rugby and the coaching do the talking for me, and that was always sort of my thing. When I finished school in South Africa, I knew my parents couldn't afford for me to go to university or go to the university that I really want to go, let alone go to university. So I knew I had to take a 12-month gap, and I got to put all my eggs in one basket and let the rugby do the talking. And I was lucky enough to manage to literally play myself into a scholarship with the University of Stellenbosch. Probably not what I would advise young players to do now, because I think I was 6 months into it and I got an 18-month injury. Luckily, I had a qualification that I could finish. But yeah, so it is just sometimes we got to take risks, jump, and then see where it takes us.
And what did you see in terms of this playing style or cultural differences around rugby? Was there any discernible differences in terms of how the game was viewed, or thoughts on strategies and how it should be played, etc.?
Yeah, there were some big differences. Obviously, still today, this is an ongoing topic of how the North versus the South play. South Africa is probably closer to the Northern Hemisphere in terms of how they play the game. So it is probably one of the biggest things for me was the duration of the rugby season was quite long. In South Africa, we've got a short, compact season, and it's over. It's over really, really quickly. So yeah, it's a long season. Obviously, the game is traditionally played very, very slow. I think the pathways were pretty big over here, where they were very limited in South Africa, where I come from. But probably the big thing for me coming over here was I sounded different, I looked different than probably 90% of the coaches in the country, and that difference, and then add on to the way I deliver, and then the way I naturally see the game, that little bit of difference, obviously, it provokes some level of interest with how things evolve for me. And I'd probably say those were the big game changers for me. Where in South Africa, there's more coaches who looks like me, where over here it was quite pretty obvious that there's not many coaches. Plus you're different, so it almost forced me to, force is probably strong word, but forced me to deliver what I know and feel and see around skill development, just to deliver it a little bit differently. Because I remember going for my first interview over here, and the 3 guys coaching before me, and they all coached. It was exactly the same. Like, you can copy and paste that session plan, and I go, "Oh, this is the way they do it." And obviously, I did mine, and it was completely different to what the kids would have experienced. And I'm talking about probably more of the backyard game stuff me and my mates back home had to come up with if we wanted to have our own version of Wimbledon in the road, for instance, with our homemade rackets. Do you see what I mean? So it just, that level of thinking slightly differently, I suppose.
And is that stuck with you today? Because as you say, I think you can, and coaches can get institutionalized to a degree in terms of how sessions should be delivered, or what a session looks like, and worrying about perception from other coaches or parents and whatnot. But do you still have that, I guess, unique spark in the way you go, actually, yeah, we're developing skills with them, but we can strip this right back down to playground games, and we can be unique in the way that we learn these skills and make it more enjoyable and fun for the kids? Do you still have that, even though you're working with the slightly older age groups?
Yeah, 100%. And I do that at every level that I coach. And it's hopefully something that will always stay true to me, and that I hope I never lose one day, because it does get a little bit boring and stale. And yeah, look, there's a time and place for everything, but I'm a big believer that play is the highest form of research, and if we can reconnect with that inner child more often, we're probably gonna expand all that problem solving and physical literacy and all these big academic words that people throw out there these days. But you'll just give them an opportunity to find solutions to their own problems. And yeah, I like I said, do it at an elite level, and I've got some success there. Some people like it, some people don't like it, but they start seeing the benefits of it, and they go, okay, maybe there's a method in the madness.
And what's your go-to practice? So if you're working with an age group and you go, listen, I want to practice that's going to really engage them, it's going to be really enjoyable, we're going to get lots of different decisions and stuff, is there one particular practice that's going to be a bit of a home run, where everyone's going to come away with it with big smiles on their face and having learned something as well?
Yeah, there's a number. So I'm a very much of I've got a few different things that I think will impact particular groups. So perhaps the way I would design a skill development session, perhaps the way I would design a particular game that cater for their needs. I'm very much of I'd like to say a flexible thinker, where it's because the one thing I might do with you might be slightly different to my man over here, for instance, but there might be similarities of that game, and then I'll jump over here to the next group, and we still got the foundation of that game there, but this group want me to kick the ball up high more often. I did an under-9 session a while ago, and I said to the guys, what do you want to do today? And they go, oh, we just want you to kick the ball up high and we'll catch it. I go, okay, brilliant. I'll kick. So that was the starting point of one of my games. The ball goes up, then you got to go score over here and then get the ball back to me. Whoever can get their balls back, you go again. So like a bomb diffuser type of game. So it's not very much where I've got one specific game that I'm gonna hang my hat on, but I've probably got a series of core things that I can flex where I need to go to. Very diplomatic answer I'm giving you here, but
no, I like that. I like that game. I'm just thinking about it in a football context, and I think you could play that really well. You talk about that combination play to find space or whatever. Actually, if you did something like that where they score, then the opposing team has to try and get it into you. If you've got 3 or 4 little games going on, it's practicing them combining to score, but it's also practicing them combining to play out to then penetrate into a particular area. So I think that, yeah, as you said there, that's quite a fun type game that does have outcomes that you can be transferable.
Yeah, 100%. And that's very much how I look at developing games. So you've got that core group of things that might work. So one of the games that I love doing with Brazil, for instance, is a rugby version of futsal. They love it because I call it rugby futsal. Yeah, and then I just add some contextualized skills to this particular game. Now I might play this same basis of this game with if I do a guest session with someone else, but their needs is slightly different. So the adaptation from that game will give me the outcome that they require, and that's very much how I look at my games. I say my games. Most of it I come up with. Some I steal and I make it my own.
And how do you make the assessment around what the standard of the environment is and where the needs need to go? So obviously you mentioned earlier that obviously you did some work with Lithuania, you did some work with the coaching on the England Sevens program, the women's Welsh program, all very different experience levels, all very different professionalization of the programs, etc. So how do you early on in a program identify actually this is what the players can do, this is where we're trying to get to, and this is the steps that we need to take in order to get there?
Yeah, again, it's probably that one where you got to chuck them in. I remember with USA, bam, straight into the deep end to an extent where I remember 3 weeks, 4 weeks into the process where I go, is this even working, man? I'm getting uncomfortable here. I think this is working. I've got to go. You stick to your guns and you adapt and you move it around what they need. Obviously did a lot of research on them before I joined that program. And I remember one of the first days of training, we did a little game, and one of the players come to me and she goes, Warren, what's the route? I was like, what do you mean, what's the route? She's like, yeah, well, what's the route? How do I get from here to there? Because that's how they think. I was like, well, the game requires you to find the best space and play to the best space. This might give you an opportunity to attack the space, but I can tell you where that space is going to be. I guarantee you it won't be there by the time you get the ball. So you got to work out where's the best space based on that moment of time. We know where it might be, but we can't guarantee it will be there. So it's obviously very much American sports. We go A, B, C, D. That's how we're gonna play the sequence, and then this random guy come in and just bombards everyone with. You're gonna have to make 3-4 different decisions. You got to pick the best one for the team here. So that was a really interesting experience, and I think winning the first World Series after 9 weeks, the first World Series event after 9 weeks, gave me a lot of credit in the bank. It wasn't a great idea, because I remember we won that tournament, and I go, well, this is not part of the Olympics plan. I don't want to win so far away from the Olympics. I need to get closer. But anyway, it worked, because then everyone bought into the process. So it's then understanding it from that point of view. Then if you're dropping it down into the grassroots game, whether it's football or rugby, look, we all see it on a daily basis. We got to help these guys be better with that higher order skills, creativity, resilience, self-organization, decision-making, adaptability, all those high order skills that, all coaches rave about on Twitter and social media, but they don't actually practice them. So we got to put stuff in where we got to design sessions where they can actually explore and improve these things. Because it's one thing us going, they can't make decisions. I just told them. We just spent the whole time working on this passing, and then when they play the game, they can't pass. Yeah, but if we spend it in a technical model, we're probably not going to see the transfer when we go onto the grass. So it's really in this community space. How do we put them in scenarios where they can explore, and then we can break it down with contextualizing skills. You can do drills, you can go into free play, whatever. So it's very much, that's how I think when I'm in that community space. For instance, give you an example. I want to do a community club senior session the other night. Their biggest problem is getting people to training. So how do you get people to training? You got to put a good product out, an exciting, attractive product where players go, that was an awesome session. Love running around, playing with my mates, all these stuff, and practicing new skills, etc., etc. I'm going to come next week. That's the product. That product requires creativity. You got to think about and be really purposeful about how we design and plan, and then we bring these guys back to the game, because no one, man, trust me, Love Island is on at the moment. I'd much rather sit with my missus and watch Love Island than go out. You know what I mean? That's how a lot of guys are, and girls are probably thinking at the moment, can't be bothered with rugby. Tonight is a really interesting episode tonight. So yeah, we just got to push ourselves from a coaching perspective a little bit more.
And you mentioned around like the World Series, I could be right in thinking that you did a World Cup cycle whilst you're there as well. What when you're building into those types of tournaments, etc., what foundations are you looking to lay in, and how much time do you get for camps prior, etc.? Because I appreciate some of them may be amateurs, so might need to do other jobs. Others are going to be professionalized, etc. So what does that actually look for you? How far out do you start laying kind of down a scheme of work or curriculum that you want to work through? Or do you do it in that way? And if not, what are you looking to achieve by the time that first game is being played, so that your group are ready to then do well in that tournament?
Yeah, so for instance, America was full time, so you could really knuckle the plan down and work back from the Olympics. Obviously, COVID had his own own agenda, but you work back from there, and obviously you build that framework system. I've just used an adaptable system that allowed loads of flexibility there in terms of that tactical periodization. You pull that, work it into your what your game model looks like. Where does your principles fit in? Where does your the priority skill areas fit into that? How do you then work out what's the demands of the game, whether they fit into that whole cycle, and then basically how do you make up the puzzle before you break the puzzle down, from the mental skills to the physical components to the after-field personal development side. How do they all fit in? So you almost build this puzzle and then you start breaking it down into these key sectors that ultimately at the end of it, it comes nicely together, but it's consistently coupled across everything thing we do. And then you just work out, obviously, what is your key themes. So that first phase, for instance, as we alluded, was I got to put them into a situation where decision making get through the roof, because if we get that right in the unstructured part of the game, then the structured part and so on becomes easier in the long run. So or almost had to use a reverse in the engineering process to expose them first before I put them back into what they know and like properly. And then so you just worked it out. I called it the explore, align, refine phase. So I put it into those 3 phases, and then sessions was broken down into those phases, and the refined phase was obviously that last little bit before we go into the games ultimately. So that's how you look from that perspective of how to ultimately put the puzzle together. But for our grassroots guys over here, it's just really understanding what is the principles, what is the required skills, whether that is rugby principles and physical principles and mental skills principles, and how do we put it into our session design so you can replicate a session where you coach an under 9, 16, 18 senior community. The foundation remains the same, and then you just tailor it based on the outcomes you need and obviously the individual's requirement, etc. That's very much how I look at things in these different spaces.
And do you have like a set time frame? So say if you're going through that explore phase, for example, and you might be going, I don't know, looking at combinations to penetrate, for example. It might be different combinations we can use to create space and penetrate. Would you say by week 2, we need to be able to do X, Y, Z? Or is it very much kind of open-ended in terms of, well, actually, we'll just see how they get on with this. And it might be that they get this done in a week, which gives us more time to work on offloading from lineouts? Or is it very structured within that in terms of we've got a week on this, a week on this, a week on this, to ensure that you cover all the bases? Because obviously the last thing you want is everything taking too long, and then when you get to tournament you haven't done pressure defense because you've spent all your time doing this.
Yeah, it's probably working out for you what is the most important stuff. Why use like a win analogy? What is important now? So you work that out. I'm very much flexible with my process, but understanding that this is this phase. So if the phase is, let's say the phase is around, I give you what's the probably best example with Brazil at the moment. The phase is leading up to a peak competition, which is the Rugby World Cup. So you got to rebuild everyone because they're at a big break. So now it's just a rebuild phase. So it's more about, so we in this exploring some new things around some of the set piece stuff at the moment. So that set piece is then broken down in a few different areas, but by let's say week 5, 6, you need to have a real good base of where you need to be. So you want to be able to, let's say, execute this consistently by that. So it gives you something to work towards, but you also know it might be finished in 2 weeks' time. So how do you move on? You might still get to week 5 and go, hold on, we're not there yet. But underneath, that's your high priority stuff. Underneath, there's always a consistent base that you never forget. But it's just, you just spike up priority stuff that you know, I get more here, but your bang for your buck stuff always sits here underneath, and you just keep checking into them, because they're the stuff that makes you good, because we always want to just focus on the stuff we can't do in coaching, isn't it? So keep tapping away with this stuff, and then hopefully in the next block you could see it now under high intensity pressure, for instance, because this block is a little bit lower because we're climbing the ladder. If that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does. I think what you said is really nice there as well, is having that underpinning principle allows you to focus on that consistently. And then if you do have those areas that maybe take a little bit longer or shorter than you'd like, you know that you've got that foundation and base to work from regardless. I guess question for me is, how much time do you spend analysing and strategizing when you're going into competitions for particular opponents? So, you know, if you're going in a group where you've got like New Zealand, Samoa and South Africa, how much time do you spend focusing on them and trying to combat some of their techniques and skills, and compared to how much time you focus on what you guys are doing and, you know, the way that you plan on playing and executing particular phases of the game?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because they vary in every team depending on the stage of your team. With England Sevens men, for instance, we had a group of unbelievable world-class players. They were, I mean, talking about the likes of Dan Norton, Tom Mitchell, Dan Bibby, Harry Glover, Richard de Carpentier. These guys were world-class Sevens players in their own right. They didn't need a lot because they were so far ahead. So the stage of that team was so far ahead. So they almost did more of the work to push the team forward. So they just required maintenance, consistent check and challenge, where you go, have you thought about that a little bit? What do you think there? So it's how you can push their game a little bit forward based on the stage of that team, because it was a very, very experienced squad. So you can drive them and you can try new things, etc. And you can be very specific with this tournament that we're just going to focus on how many tries we can score from a scrum, for instance, or penalty plays, or whatever it might be. And to answer your question, the opposition is a good one, because you can then spend a lot of time around the opposition, because this group just requires maintenance almost. We flip that probably currently with Brazil, for instance. The team requires probably more before you look at the outside, based on where this team is currently. So that's always an interesting dynamic. So this team currently, and to be fair, we've now gone to a stage where we can now tailor the group. So when you're in a group, you can closely look at the group, and then facilitate training closer to how that group defends. So how New Zealand defend from a scrum, how, let's say, Australia defend from a scrum, how Fiji defend from a scrum. To be fair, that's a tough group if you put them all in one group anyway. How they defend from a scrum, for instance, then you can strategize. So you always look at that, but the group probably needs a little bit more work before we go right now over. You can probably do this more. If that makes sense. So it all depends on where your team is, what stage. but probably the key thing is there's no limitation. It is just the amount is you reduce the amount. You all still go, look, can you have a look at their setups from defense? You see?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess my next question off the back of that is how much of it is your strategy or game model, game plans related to the players that you've got as well? If you've got a very physically imposing team that might be a little bit stronger, if you do strategize to use that as a strength? Equally, if you got a very small team, that are very agile but might not be so great in contact, do you make sure that you kind of create a game model around that principle that actually we're going to play like this because we know that we're not going to be able to get into a hitting match with New Zealand because they're just going to pick us up and throw us out of bounds? Like, do you think, does your game model adapt to that accordingly?
Yeah, 100%. It's you got to look at that. So your team dictates the way you're going to play. And that's one of probably the best work so far with Brazil is how do you play to your strengths, basically. So now, how do you strategize to be able to bring these ridiculously fast athletes into the game more often? Because if they catch the ball more, they score more tries. Simple game. So how do we get the ball there? So then you got to put a few things in place to get it there. Now, the cool thing about sevens, you do this in game one, in game two, someone make an adaptation with how they defend. And if you've not quickly evolved, then you get found out. So sevens is all about cat and mouse. So you got to that's why you need a flexible adapting team. That's why I love the game so much, because there's no one size fits all type of process, because they're all so uniquely different. So yeah, I think the player strengths builds your structure basically, and then then it's your job your job as coach, and then combine that with some player input of how you're gonna find ways to tactically create space for your superstars.
No bomb squad in sevens. They'd get found out too quickly if you had the bomb squad.
That'd be pretty cool. That would be a pretty cool tactic to bring your own version of a bomb squad in. If you can get your team to that level, wow, that's pretty good.
It's interesting. It's always fun to watch that lot. But listen, I appreciate we're close to the time allotted for this. So one question for me to finish, which is, who's the most impressive coach or player you've worked with in this space, and why?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Geez, most impressive. Let's go coaches. There's not many coaches that I highly rate, to be honest. But that's another conversation. But I probably probably Simon Amor. I worked under him for 5 years, and he made me. He forced me to be good at my job, put it that way. So I learned some really cool lessons that still today in my coaching every single day. So he'd be up there as a coach that a coach and a thinking buddy that I always look up to. A guy that I really rate as a coach, just watching his stuff. I've never met him personally. Scott Wisemantel, he's coaching Aussie at the moment, Australia 15s, the attack coach. I think he's a pretty cool coach, the way he looks at stuff. So those would be two guys. And then obviously look at across the different sports with Pete Carroll and those guys over there. There's always some inspirational information there. Players.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting just to see, that unique way in which you work, and still being able to do that at the top elite level. Because I think quite often we see maybe in the academy systems, coaches give that a go, but then when they get to top level, they kind of go, well, no, I've got to conform because otherwise, I can't do that. So to hear that you're still doing that at the top end, I think gives everyone.
I see that a lot. I see that a lot. Player wise, geez, I got so many good players. Yeah, Marcus Smith would definitely be up there because again, he does what he feels is the right thing. And I see that when he was a 13-year-old little fella. So I still very much enjoy watching him. Two female players, Emily Scarrett. When I coached the England Sevens, she's always tried to be ahead of you. She's like a mini Yoda. So I had to really be on my mettle when I coached her because she's going to beat you. So you had to be ahead in terms of games. So if I come up with a game and I put a constraint, I solve that problem really quickly. And then I have to add a new problem. She goes, well, you keep changing it. I was like, well, yeah, because it's my game. So she'll be up there from a player perspective. And then Liv Kelter, USA, unreal athlete, soccer player, ice hockey player, and sevens player for USA. That's pretty cool. She's a pretty cool player. And then sevens wise, I'd say Tom Mitchell would be up there from a sevens perspective, just in terms of his brain. It's unreal the way he thinks about stuff. So those would be my players.
Perfect. Listen, Warren, really appreciate your time. A great conversation. And where can people find your work at? Obviously, you mentioned at the start. Where can they find your work if they are interested in anything they've heard today?
Yeah, so you can obviously hit me up on my website, which is coachingforpotential.org. There's a lot of stuff on there. And find me on Instagram at Rugby Creative. I post all my video content on there for coaches and players and people to learn from. And then on that website you can see the stuff that I do, from coach mentoring to skill development, team stuff, etc. So reach out.
Perfect. Listen, really appreciate your time, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you very much, mate. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.